Good afternoon. My name is Chelsea Hill. I am currently a specialist tier two student at West Georgia, and I'm going to be presenting my research poster presentation that's all about building and sustaining an ethical organization. So, to give some background and some context, I am an assistant principal at Tri-Cities High School. We are located in Fulton County Schools. You can find us on the south portion of the county. And we are a school that is very, very, very rich in tradition. We also are heavily entrenched in a lot of long-standing relationships amongst our staff. We do have several staff members who have been at the school for 30 years plus. But we also have a whole other side where we have a multitude of staff members that are interlodge professionals, which are some of our foreign educators who are here amongst like work visas. The school is very, very, very entrenched in traditional values, which also means that some of the long-standing practices sometimes have blurred the lines when it comes to an ethical organization. We are very diverse, but with that also means that we are also a Title I school, and with our diversity, it just comes with a multitude of backgrounds and also values as it pertains to education from both the educator standpoint as well as our students. So some of the things that we have struggled with are some of like the norms of inconsistent staffing. That's from the administration level all the way down to the teacher standpoint. We do have a large amount of novice teachers. They come to us initially and they're just trying to get their feet wet and trying to learn the profession. And that sometimes can be a challenge for us. It is located in a community that has significant challenges. So we have high mobility rates, very high truancy rates with our kids, some economic barriers because we are 100% lower socioeconomic. And then we also have some instructional practices that are both outdated as well as misinformed. And so we do have a lot of different challenges that we do face. And so some of the things that I've tried to do as an assistant principal, I've tried to interweave my instructional responsibility and vision with supporting our operations amongst the school, promoting a positive school climate, and also building my teacher capacity, especially as it pertains to my new teachers. Some of our academic issues come directly, they're directly correlated to poor instructional practices. And so some of the things that we do try to focus on are, we do try to remain ethical, although sometimes that's a little bit challenging. It's difficult sometimes to prioritize what's best for the organization and remove yourself as the forefront of your thought. And so that's something we work through. I am responsible for developing ethical leaders. So that also means that I myself am consistently trying to find better practices that are transparent. I do try to model fairness. I do try to lead with integrity. And I also encourage my coworkers that are on my team to do the same. Okay. So our leadership problem of practice as it relates to our ethical culture and behavior is really the inconsistencies. We have inequitable staff behaviors, and it's normally kind of tied to people's perspectives. You do have some people who have different values. And so over time, what has happened is you have the people who've been able to stick it out. We are a tough school to work in. So you have some that battle burnout. You have some that feel like the financial benefit and with people making their salary does not balance well with the actual workload. And so our leadership with its constant turnover, sometimes it's not always aligned with ethical decision making and also professional expectations. So because of it, we've had issues with preferential treatment, which of course is not ethical at all. We have had inconsistent enforcement of school policies. It's almost like where sometimes people will tailor policy to benefit their agendas. We have reluctance to adopt evidence-based instructional practices because they do require extra work. Sometimes you do have to go above and beyond and do more than the status quo. And then, of course, just resistance to accountability measures. Bottom line, a lot of our staff don't necessarily like being challenged or being told that something they're doing requires perfecting. Okay, so some of my personal ethical leadership areas of growth, I would say, are navigating with greater confidence. I struggle with the pushback that comes from our staff, the emotional responses that may come, and it causes me to want to be very strategic in how I approach things, which sometimes I just don't have enough time to get to the multitude of complex issues that arise. And so I'm willing to confront unethical practices, but then it becomes the challenge of getting someone else to understand the error of their ways and being able to professionally navigate them while also helping build their capacity. Delegating accountability is something that I have consistently been told by my principals as an area of growth for me. I take on too much responsibility. Typically, if the work is not getting done by someone else, even if they are required or responsible for the task, if I see that it's not getting done, I care about kids, and that's always my priority. And so I'll take it on myself. And instead of distributing my leadership practices and trusting other people to actually uphold those ethical standards, I just would rather do it myself and do it correctly the first time. And that has consistently, it's backfired because it's caused me to be burdened sometimes with things that should not be as heavy for me to carry. And then also maintaining boundaries under pressure. So we're in a high school. I do want to fix everything. And it's challenging to prioritize ethically what needs to be prioritized. And so that is definitely a challenge and of area growth for myself. And my strengths, though, would definitely be I value driven decision making. So I definitely aligned my leadership actions with my organizational values, even if they're unpopular. So it's always my favorite go to is to lean into policy. And I let that lead and direct my steps instead of trying to defend my decision making. I'm very good about building relationships. My staff trust me. They sometimes trust me a little too much. They do burden me with a lot of things, both professional and personal. And because I do value the human experience of our profession, I end up taking a lot of that on, but I do create that safe space to do so. So I do appreciate the fact that my staff feels very comfortable with me. And then also my reflective practices. I am constantly reevaluating myself. I'm regulating and evaluating my own biases, my own assumptions. I take myself out of it and look at policy and then what's best for kids. And that truly shapes my leadership. So the personal ethical leadership that I really, really, really enjoyed working with throughout this presentation, looking at the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, I looked at some of those standards. So one of those being like Standard 10, professional conduct. I encourage all of my staff members as well. You always lead with professionalism first and not your subjective emotions. So I consistently reinforce expectation that everybody has to manage their personal emotions. We keep everything student centered. And instead of being reactionary, I do try to be proactive and encourage others to do so too. So, amongst that, I feel like it's important that leaders, instead of reacting, we pause and we reflect. And that's a form of regulation. Instead of becoming emotionally upset and make outbursts and quick jerk reactions, I like to actually take a minute to process and I try to teach others to do the same. Then when you think about moral courage, what that resonates with me would be legal compliance, honesty, and public funds and property. And the reason being is because it's all about your honesty. When you report misconduct, you uphold student safety, if you do so and you lead into the Georgia PC standards, it's very, very, very easy sometimes to make things more black and white, even when it feels gray from a personal standpoint. So I follow procedures. I go to the rule book, I look at what the policy says, and that is how I conduct myself professionally. And then accountability is everything. Sometimes it's okay to be wrong. I mean, we're all wrong at some point. So when you lead into standard 4, the misrepresentation of information, it's very important to be accountable for that. You want to be able to, leaders should explain clear expectations, decisions, their consequences, and then they can maintain trust through their consistency with ethical standards. Okay. So when building an ethical team, some of the things that I think are very important that I did pull from chapter 8 that Johnson stated, he highlights the central factor is ethical or unethical group functioning, and that is communication. We want to make sure we effectively communicate. So sometimes you have to create some rules of engagement, and that big one is communication. Communication kind of can change the trajectory of any objective you might have. So when you're building an ethical team, I would start with the norm of just finding um, Communication strategies. So one of the things that I would do would be to implement a constructive conflict resolution strategy. So I would use things like restorative conversations. Instead of listening to react, I would require we listen first, we summarize what that person has stated, and then we respond. I also think it's very important to implement ethical decision-making frameworks. So Johnson argues ethical teams must use ethical decision-making structures. So what I would do is I would use the model. I would use Johnson's moral problem-solving framework because I just simply like the guided questions. It makes it very simple and it's an easy way to keep everybody on track. So I would ask what values are in conflict, who is affected, what ethical principles guide the decision, what decision produces the greatest fairness and respect, and then use the data from that information. And then also when planning or building an ethical team, I would establish some shared values and some ethical norms. And so if we have a clear moral foundation, even if we don't necessarily all come to the table completely aligned, we can develop ethical norms as a group in which everyone can agree to. So everybody should be on the same page when it comes to responsibility and honesty, respect, fairness, and compassion. So I would align my shared values with organizational expectations while using like the Georgia Code of Ethics for educators. Again, I like to lean into policy. So when shaping an ethical organization, I would definitely say I align myself with what Johnson states in chapter 9. He says that an ethical organization climates require formal structures. So I like to lean into a formal structure. I like to have the rules that we can all abide by so we can remain fair, and that's what keeps it ethical. We don't have to do a lot of arguing and rigmarole when something is simply established with a set of norms and rules. So some of the challenges that I would argue would probably come in systems thinking. Well, first of all, addressing resistance through feedback loops and inclusive communication. I would have cycles of feedback. It wouldn't just happen one time, it would happen consistently. So every time that we meet, this will be a part of our norms. Transparent communication behind all changes, all plannings will be discussed in order to prevent like burnout. I would distribute the leadership responsibilities, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I sometimes struggle with that delegation. So I would use a peer accountability structure, create ethical leadership teams, and then also have like collaborative reflection. And we could use ethical paradigms to do so. And then for using long-term planning to navigate complexity, I would anticipate a second order effects of my decisions. I would create multi-year ethical goals and align them with our school's mission. So again, we're constantly working to the same plan. I would establish ethical policies and routines to reduce anything that might be ambiguous and unclear to anyone. And I built a culture that was capable of sustaining ethical practices during our leadership transitions. So essentially, it'll be like a rule book that we would operate based on. And then these are the references that I did use. I did use our references from our coursework because I did actually thoroughly enjoy them. I'm able to take a lot of the things back to my organization, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.